So let's switch over a little bit and talk about community engagement in the faith community. As we've already kind of talked of why you should be engaged as a person in the faith community. Now let's talk about the community engagement. As you have said, and many people may not know, we moved to Danville, Illinois when I was around 10 or so. My father was a pastor of the AME church there. So I grew up there until high school. And I can say that there has been an increase in knowledge of politics and the things that are around. But because this isn't Chicago, this is a smaller area where your local politician is your neighbor or is your teacher or works at the local wherever. Do you think that engagement does not appear to be as important because of those things? Have you ever even kind of considered it? Because your context, you definitely come from a city where the politicians were normally raised up, they were brought up, they just didn't come out of anywhere because they seen something was wrong, but it was a definite raising of a politician. Whereas I believe in the smaller town, there's not so much of a raising, there's an injustice and I'm bold enough to run, or I have enough money to afford to run. So when we look at this from a community standpoint, why do you think that during these times, what would be your opinion on the engagement of the community of the Champaign area?
Well, I've only been down here for a year, and so it's limited to some interactions. And so having caused some riots with these statements before, I say them with a smile and a wink. Community engagement in Champaign is interesting. I do think that there's a outsider versus insider dynamic. I go back to the small southern town, and even to the point of how things are engaged. So I've recently had Black folks who are native to here basically say you're a carpetbagger. We don't need your help. Just kind of stay at your church. We're good here because you're an outsider. You don't know what's going on, and every other outsider that's come through has rained havoc. Different kind from whites and other people of color. They're just not used to boldness. We don't know what to do. You're just so blunt. But if you ever watch Eyes on the Prize, right? And you know me, I'm a teacher, so I'm gonna pull it out of history. It's literally the same context that they used to say. And I know this is public television, so I'm just using it as historical language. Our niggers don't act like this. It's these folks coming from these universities and these towns and citing our local niggers, and now and it's sometimes it has that feel. Even when Black folks, if you read civil rights documentaries, there was initially a lot of resistance to King and his crew when they would come into a space because folks are like, we don't do that. Y'all coming down here inciting a share. And so I think that's one aspect. There's something that kind of forms a fiefdom, if you will, that keeps this insider outsider going, because you definitely don't see it in the power rooms, right? Because I highly doubt those who run the University of Illinois, those who run, OSF, they're not all from Champaign-Urbana, but yet they're in the spaces of power and they're welcoming and they work together and they bring that idea down here. It's when you start getting into community engagement that idea of homegrown versus, out of towner kind of comes into play. I think also it might be experiencing a space of community fatigue. I got here and it was a community already engaged in a lot of activism. Then we had the summer of 2020. And so now we're kind of in a space where people are like, I just need a break from activism, right? And while I'm empathetic to that, I also remind people systems of oppression and evil don't take breaks. They don't take holidays. They rotate out, put in fresh players, but they PTO check, if they ever stop, it's going to be amazing because they don't take no days off. And so that's kind of where I see it. I also think that you're right. Down in smaller towns, in Chicago, it's definitely very big nepotism. If you got the right name, the right look, the right body type, you know you're going to be the next alderman. You knew that from the time you were 5. You don't have to do anything, but not do anything crazy. Down here, the candidates I've experienced seem to be like my boy Mike Lewis. Mike has become my favorite. Just see a need, you know. Tatiana Ammons sees a need and just raises herself up and says, "Listen, I'm gonna do this." And those are just the first two that immediately pop into my head. You know, Katie Blakeman to some extent. She talked about, I want to run because I know what I experienced as a mother, and I want to get into it. And so I think that's what you kind of find. That's one of the big difference in terms of community engagement. Uh, it's not social service heavy. That's the other thing. So I think that also creates some other problems, but you don't find 50 agencies doing the same thing like you would back in Chicago. So there's, you know, see you try. That's the trauma folk. Back home, it'd be 70 versions of the trauma agency, each with a special focus. So I think down here, the smallness does give it the benefit of laser focus.
You said two things with this. One was a mix of community comfortability as well as community fatigue. Um, how, as a community, can we strive to move forward in this space? Especially looking for more, because I personally would say that I want more faith based individuals simply because I want your theology as well as your morality to somewhat match what I believe. So, in this space, there is I hear you in the space of the comfortability. So, we are comfortable in the space that we do. We don't want to go bigger. We don't want to move this way because that can cause ruckus. So, how do we shake people up in this season, especially because I literally just seen a meme 2 seconds before this that was saying, like, I need to take a nap because after this election, let me get prepared for more civil unrest. So, um, I think there's fear. I think we're talking about community fatigue. Now we're talking about a comfortability, but there is chaos. There's chaos beyond this pandemic. There is chaos going on. So how would you address that? And in what ways would you address that?
Starting with your first one, being from Chicago, and I understand I'm tired of outsiders traipsing through because as you know, I'm from Chicago, true and blue. And if you say something negative about my city without a context, you going it's going we're gonna have a misunderstanding. But I had a friend, Sierra Bates, who works Live Free, that does violence prevention. We were shooting the breeze over lunch, and she said, "But if what we were doing was working, you and I wouldn't be sitting here now having this conversation." And it hit me like a ton of bricks. Uh, Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. And so while it might be annoying to have outsiders come in and kind of point it out, it's the same thing with a company. You know, we have a problem with, let's say, dishonest employees. You bring in a consultant that looks at what's going on, looks at the culture from a from a backed up perspective and say, oh, it's fostered here, 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 and here. They do audits, they interview people and say, and you've created this culture of, and then you can correct it because you've had somebody from the outside tell you, hey, this is incorrect. And even, but it's a partnership. What I'm arguing is don't shut down the partnership, because if what you were doing was working, we wouldn't be having this conversation now. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is faith leaders have to ask themselves which Jesus do they serve. And so this is where I'm going to spend our last time talking about it. There are definitely two versions of Christianity. There's a version of Christianity. There's a version of all faiths. But again, I don't only speak on my context out of respect. But there's always two versions of every faith. There's one that serves oppression and one that liberates from oppression. So I would challenge faith leaders, and even when Karen and I was trying to put this panel together, she had reached out to some folks. I reached out to some folks, and me, I got at the 2 or 3 times I stopped asking. Why are we afraid to get on camera and talk about faith and faith in politics? What is the fear there? And so, which Jesus do you serve? Because Jesus sat in the temple and talked about these issues. Jesus confronted the community. He confronted the Pharisees. And at the end of his life, he confronted the Roman Empire and Pontius Pilate. And so I would ask them, which God do they serve? Do they serve the God that Harriet Tubman served, the God of Nat Turner, the God of Malcolm X, Albert Cleave, Katie Cannon, Alexis Wilson, Terrence Thomas? Do they serve that Jesus, or do they serve the Jesus of Massimo, of Bull Connor, of Mitch McConnell, that says, I value certain lives over others, I value certain humans over others, I value certain beliefs over others? And so you won't see more faith communities doing that until you until you they have that conversation. Case in point, over the summer, HV Transformational did tons of marches in High Hope areas, tons of marches in High Hope areas, and these were areas impacted by the violence. So after the professionals came in, and did what they did, they would come in, they would do marches, and it was these are guys that are on the ground, brothers who've been locked up, sisters who've been locked up, so they speak the language. Only two pastors were ever out there with them, myself and James Felder. And so I've heard the cosmetics, they kind of raw, as a pastor, I don't know how to deal with all that rap. You don't know how to talk to your community? Because these are community members, right? There other folks didn't come out. Now I don't know what they did behind the scenes. So I'm gonna be clear, you could have been doing a bunch behind the scenes, but where it was seen and when things were saw, and if you ask them, they will tell you, we only knew two pastors who rode with us, and Willie Comer. I'm sorry, so it was me, Felder, Comer, three pastors out of how many in this area? I dare say that's not even a 1% kind of thing. So, and we're talking work after the cameras died down, after the big marches died down, when there wasn't no more cameras, when there wasn't no more stopping intersections, when we were doing the work, it was nowhere to be seen. And so I say that's because many of them are serving the God of the oppressor. They see themselves as displaced oppressors. They've bought into narratives that this is what God wants. God don't want you doing that. God don't, very Old Testament, if you poor, if you broken, then you did something, right? But what did Jesus say when asked that? What did this person do that they deserved that? Nothing. They didn't do nothing. Just things happen and God is gonna get the glory from it. And so that's kind of where you won't see more faith leaders until they have that reckoning.
Okay. I am thinking of, to your point, which was a very great point, of which God do you serve? Within that space, a lot of times, especially now, we are faced with a decision as faith leaders, to either go with the oppressed or go with the liberated from the oppressed. Let's just say someone who is new to their faith, and they come into this space. What exactly would you say to them at this time? What would you want them to know? Because I've met several people who are now woke. They're now up, they're uprising, but maybe I'm not a marcher. Maybe I'm not a marcher. Maybe I'm not. What spaces are available for faith, people of faith, to really move in, and still feel liberated in the space that they're called to?
So this was a question asked when Black Lives Matter first kicked off. Black Lives Matter intentionally, for good or ill, moved around the church and told the church, if you want to be with us, we'll have you, but we're not chasing you, we're not begging you, we're not going through you. And so one of the questions was, what is the role of the church in this moment? And I remember asking a Black Lives Matter activist, and they said, well, when all the marching is done, we sometimes need a place to come cry. We sometimes need a place to come be hugged. We sometimes need a place to take a 10-minute nap. We need some hot food. And so in our context, God asks for your time, your talent, and your treasures, right? And so that's still the same thing. So you're not a marcher. You definitely can make sandwiches. You definitely can hug. You definitely can be a word of encouragement. Well, I don't do that. I'm an introvert. Then you can write a check. You can write a check. You can donate goods. You can make some sandwiches. Uh, I'm not good at cooking. I ain't got no money. Well, you got the gift of gab. And so there's always something you can do. And I think in the perfect formula that is time, talent, and treasures, there's always something you can do, whether it be wisdom. Anybody knows me knows I'm transitioning for a myriad of reasons out of frontline work. I've had a great career, been doing this since I was 16, 45 now. Um, I should be in mentoring now, mentoring young activists on the lessons learned, uh, the offer our wisdom I've won, like that kind of thing. I should be helping them formulate strategies. No, we did that. They're immune to that. Like that's the kind of thing. And then when I'm tired of mentoring, then I should be doing it with my pocketbook. Like I think that's the biggest struggle that left of center folk, moderate folk struggle with, and that's the biggest thing is resources. These movements require money. As I said earlier, me and my homegirl talk about this all the time. If we were an evangelical, if we are one of those multicultural churches talking about doing community work, we we'd have Bethel be 7 stories large. We'd have state of the art. We had transformers in the lobby because they put all kind of money into it because right of center believes that I put my money where my mouth is. We got to get the other side of the equation. And that's why you never see a radical out front pastor. We're not marketed. We don't have the bandwidth. We don't have the tools. Like if it wasn't for See You Try, if it wasn't for the things we do, nobody would be talking to me. I mean, outside of when News Gazette reached out, because we don't have our own kind of, and that's a whole nother conversation. We don't have our own kind of vehicles and mechanisms, and the ones we do have, we don't rival that. So as much as I love See You Try, Karen can ask me to do this every week, and I'll do it. It's not the word network, and it's not the word network because we haven't put the resources to make it there.
No, I completely agree with that. As we get ready to close, what would be 3 things that you would tell or you would want people to know who are struggling with this journey of faith and politics?
Um, there is no beef between faith and politics. You do politics in your faith all the time. Where you sit in your church is political, right? You think it's not, but let somebody come sit in your seat and you turn into the negotiation, you turn into the bully. Who preaches is political. Who gets hired as pastor is political. So there's no separating faith and politics. None at all. None at all. So that's one. Two, you can claim it is, but understand that you are conceding other people to make choices on your life that may not look like, operate, or believe in you and your humanity. So as I used to tell my mom, that's fine. You think voting is worldly, but when they cut city services over here because the alderman had believed that city services was socialist, you're gonna think back to that moment, right? Especially when he wins by 12 votes or something like that, right? So if you play the game or you don't, but the game is still gonna go on, right? The third thing I would encourage everybody to do is this. A lot of times the faith that we have has been given us through the lens of those who've held us in bondage, especially, and in this context, I'm talking to Black American Christians, have been given to us by those who held us in bondage, right? And so that's why there's a reason, even generations later, we know the words of Paul, but we struggle with the words of Jesus, right? We don't know the Old Testament. As I said, somebody arguing now in some group somewhere, that pastor said everything from Isaiah to Malachi was all prophecies about. It is. But this wasn't given to us when we were inheriting the faith. There's a reason why we don't talk about Nat Turner, David Walker. We don't talk about the AME Church. We don't talk about these institutions of liberation because that changes the narrative. So third thing I would tell them is that you serve a God of liberation, right? Read Isaiah, read Matthew. The book of Mark starts off with a proclamation. Hear the good news of Jesus Christ, right? That's them taking the Roman proclamation as a sign of rebellion, as a sign to say, no, Caesar's not God, because the proclamation was hear the news of Caesar, who, the good news of Caesar, who they thought was a God. And then Mark is subversive in the beginning and saying, nope, that's not what that is. Jesus is this. And so I would encourage us to re-examine our faith. How is it that we all serve the same faith, but what did Martin Luther King understand? What did Rosa Parks understand? What did Hosea Walker, and these are all preachers, what did they understand about liberation? And so I think those are the three things I would take away. To fellow clergy, we're in a season where, like Jeremiah, we're in a season of revelation, the church of Sardis. Who are we? Why are we lukewarm in a time of evil? And if your definition of evil only extends to who's sleeping with who and who has the right to be married, then I would ask you to reevaluate your definitions of evil. Um, if your definition of evil extends to, you just don't like Black Lives Matter because they ain't no black men in leadership, I would ask you to reevaluate your definition of evil. There's some solid critiques you can lay against that, the way the movement is constructed, but that can't be one of them. And so I think for clergy, I would definitely ask us and invite us to reconceptualize how we see evil and who gave us these definitions of evil.
Yeah, no, I definitely am in full agreement of that. Well, I thank you for letting me jump in on here and ask you some great questions on faith and politics. These are conversations we have personally a lot of times. So I thank you for this opportunity.
No
Um,
worries. I appreciate you being willing to do it. Like I said, I thought Karen was going to be doing this interview, but I didn't know she wanted me to do it all. And so next time I ask one of those detailed questions you yell at me about asking. But it
right.
was an honor to do this. And so, yeah.
Excellent. Well, we thank you.